gentlemen, Carbone Thugs in Harmony is on the radio. One of my former teammates of the Phillies, managed by the great Phil Stokes, used to call me Carbone Thugs in Harmony, and this is the group. Would he approve of my podcast, my radio station, Mookie the Degenerate Gambler Show, where I am the Degenerate Gambler, live in a Civic? Please win, because I know that I will not. And this week's barrage of episodes have to do with my philosophy of teaching, as I have been a high school teacher for over 22 years in special ed and social science, and pretty much taught all the subjects, because you have to be highly qualified to teach everything. But we're doing 1,000 sources in 200 days. And what have these sources gotten me? They've given me what I think is an inkling of how to solve brain diseases and hopefully prevent Alzheimer's. And I do truly believe that it would, by at least half. I just don't see how it wouldn't. If you apply my methods with zero drugs taken, to be honest with you, because the only feedback I've gotten that's been negative has been the fact that, oh, I don't prescribe to those drugs. You're telling people to take drugs. Well, I'm not telling people to take drugs. I'm saying that psychedelics are safe and probably will be used for this in the future, but are already being used for stuff like to treat trauma, PTSD, and even schizophrenia, things like that. And there's so many classes of psychedelics that I'll go into it at some point, but my point in my video that I put out was that you can produce these things naturally in your own brain. Your brain can release DMT, I know that for sure. I'm not sure exactly what the Wim Hof method releases in your brain, but it has to be something that makes you feel good, because it definitely does. And it probably unhooks a molecule from some receptor of the brain, some protein, and either puts another one in there or rearranges the molecules so that the protein behaves differently. And I'm sure that's what happens. So we have structures of atoms, molecules, proteins. That's basically the direction I'm going in when I talk about science. It's atoms, molecules, stuff, earth materials, and then atoms, molecules, human materials, i.e. proteins. So Alzheimer's be darned, we don't need to solve that. What about the stuff that I truly am an expert in, which is mental health issues related to school, okay? And we're talking about blowing the lid on education. It doesn't mean I don't want to be a teacher. It doesn't mean I don't love being a teacher. I'm just saying that education always can improve, and I'm saying blowing the lid on it, but it's not really blowing the lid on it. But there may be certain stereotypes and prejudice and things like that in education surrounding people with mental health issues. And I taught a class for students with special education needs, specifically for ones that had emotional difficulties. They called it emotional disturbance. So they qualified for things like schizophrenia, bipolar, ADHD, but basically depression and anxiety and anger were the three things behaviors that I dealt with for years. And I became pretty much a master. I don't do it anymore, but I can take especially with young boys, I can take a freshman male and pretty much absolve him of all his issues pretty much instantly. And I have maybe 50 or 60 documented cases, but they all worked. And I know 10 to 20 sets of parents that would say that at least the program did it for them, and a few that said, well, it was really Mr. Carbone, how an instant changed this person's kid's life. And I've had kids tell me certain things I said to them that changed their whole perspective in regards to mental health problems. But the reason I have a unique perspective is because I do believe that school can cause these problems. and or contribute to them for sure. Obviously, lots of times mental health problems don't come out until you have to go do something and have to be in front of a crowd and be with people and go socialize with the general public away from your household. That's a big deal. You know, the social mores and things you have going on and the basically beliefs you have as a family are all different, and sometimes they do and do not jive with school in general. But I've been able to get a family to understand and deal with and live with education as well as individuals, which is the most important thing. But it becomes individual, family, clan or group, nation, you know, city, nation, state, world, and just keeps going. And the same things you can apply for the individual can be applied to the world. And this is what quantum mechanics and quantum physics really is all about, breaking it down into little tiny pieces apart. So I've been able to identify and predict what may or may not have aided a child's distrust or anxiety, distrust related to school and or anxiety related to school from the beginning. And it almost always is just some moment when they either first went to school or first had frustration with a subject. And you bring kids back to those moments and talk about clearing trauma. You discuss what happened. I tell them how it wasn't fair to them and how they can deal with it now. And you deal with old trauma. Lots of kids don't want to deal with, I don't want to talk about school. School's been horrible for me. I don't want to talk about it. Well, that's going to shut off. I was able to get those conversations opened to say, in general, it's usually not a student's fault when they get frustrated with school. It could be a teacher's lesson, which most families go to that. It could be the way they learn. It could be so many things. But when I introduce my thoughts now, it really opened the door, because it could be that we all know more than what they do in education. In other words, a story like the star seeds, that we came from the stars, we wrote a contract for ourselves, all of our up and downs, just like God has a plan for us, that we wrote it for ourselves. It almost makes more sense that way, because God plays some cruel tricks. Maybe it's better that these tricks I played on myself and with my clan up in the stars before I was born, and my memory was erased. See, so we have no memories when we're born, period. But if we can surmise that maybe we knew all this stuff before we were born, especially academics, that we knew all the sciences, all the maths from higher above, way more than we know on Earth. And so some of our frustration is like, well, I've already done this before, or why am I doing this? Just the question why. It's sometimes maybe not because you don't know what you're doing. It could be because you know a lot more. And that hits home with a lot of students, especially, well, it just does. And in my own personal life, when I went back on the few moments I've had frustrated with academic when I was a student, seems like, you know what, I may have been right, and the only way I could have been right is if I did know more than my teacher already. And I'm going to say I was probably born with those gifts, and they came from somewhere else. So let's go ahead and believe for a minute the starseed story that I'm from the Pleiadian star system, which I don't believe that, because I always question myself. It's not been verified. It's not scientifically verified that I'm from some star system. So there you go. But just considering it has helped me to deal with the academic issues that I've had and the frustrations I've had, even with something like calculus. I've only had a couple frustrations with actual subjects, and it turns out maybe I was right. In calculus, I said, what's a limit? I didn't understand a certain part of it. It turns out that mankind has the same questions still now that I had the first time I looked at it. Now, how did I know that? I don't know. I can't be that brilliant. Maybe that knowledge had already been downloaded to me in a previous life or previous whatever, something. But it gives you reasons for things. So, mental health problems. I will be back on that subject soon. We're 10 minutes in. We'll go for another 5-10 minutes on what school does and what I would do with any kid that had mental health issues coming to me. And I've already done this throughout my career, and I would love to apply it school-wide for any families that wish to join in. The Mookster will be back.